You've probably heard from the coolest teacher in school that learning history is important. It helps us understand the context of what's happening in the world and how to avoid past mistakes and achieve successes. And it makes for some great storytelling. There have been endless books, television, and today's topic, video games, created to give us a constant flow of entertainment based on past historical events. Think of any time period, and I guarantee you there's at least one video game out there based on it. And that's kind of what I want to explore today. So I picked the 17 most significant time periods and played a different game that takes place in each one. And being a vast lover of all video games, I tried to include as many different genres as I could. Open world exploration, strategy, platformers, city building, linear story, and a couple of games I don't even know which category they belong in. This video has everything. But before we start, there's a couple of things you should know. For one, I'm not going to go through every single game and describe what's historically accurate and what's not. That would be long and tedious and not really the vibe I'm going for. Instead, I'm going to talk a little about the time period, how the game reflects that time period, and is the game actually any fun? Quick side note, I'm a very positive person who can find enjoyment in pretty much everything, so go easy on me for not being too critical. You also don't need to worry much about spoilers because the majority of the games, I only gathered the first couple of hours of gameplay. With that being said, if you enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's rewind far back to 10,000 BC, the Primal Age, or Prehistoric. The start of the Prehistoric Age is a bit iffy. It's normally marked by human-like beings appearing on Earth, with it ending when contemporary writing systems were introduced. But because the time period was, well, prehistoric and these writing systems did not exist yet, different regions debate on when the time period actually ended, but it's typically agreed to be between 3000 to 5000 BCE. There are three sub-time periods that make up the Prehistoric Era. Paleolithic, where simple tools were created and used, and hominins, the primal ancestors to humans, created hunting groups. Mesolithic, humans began adjusting to a new environment due to the Ice Age and invented new tools. Lastly is Neolithic, where more complex societies were being established and advancing in areas such as agriculture, pottery, and animal domestication. Now for this time period, I had to start off with a banger, Far Cry Primal. I mean, come on, it's the perfect game to show off the time period. Taking place in 10,000 BCE, you play as a hunter named Takar, who was part of a tribe called the Wenja. After being ambushed by a freaking saber-toothed tiger, he's left alone and defenseless. His goal is to rebuild the Wenja home by creating alliances, exploring the lands, and fighting off hostile tribes. And you definitely feel the prehistoric vibe when you play this game. There's no buildings, traditional houses, or anything like that. Just dense forests and mountains filled with extinct animals like woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers. It really puts you in the mindset of being a true hunter and gatherer, especially with all the different resources you can collect. Same with the weapons and tools you use. Not made of metal obviously, but made from wood, bone, and flint. And fire is incredibly important in this game, as it was back then. It was much more of a tool, a way of life. Light, warmth, and a protection from predators was just a few of the things fire was used for. But it wouldn't be a prehistoric game without hunting because that was the main goal of people in this time. Without hunting, there was no living, and there are plenty of hunting opportunities in this game. You can even tame a bunch of different animals to help you do so, among other things. I mean, were we riding saber-toothed tigers around? Probably not, but it does represent how we domesticated wolves to help protect us while we sleep. Lastly is the spirituality aspect. This game can get very trippy with visions and seeing outer-worldly things. Far Cry as a series likes to do this in a lot of their games, but cave art discovered by archaeologists shows that many people back then actually believed to have seen spirits in nature and animals. Now, is this game any fun? Yes. You'd think a game that takes place in a time period where things like weapons and opportunities were limited wasn't very fun, but they did a great job keeping things interesting through all the different side missions, combat, and exploration. And being able to tame crazy animals is a big plus. And the crafting mechanics are really nice because in other games it could be kind of a suggestion, but here you have to, which kind of makes sense. The story and characters are very interesting, the skill progression, expanding your empire by taking down enemy tribes, it's honestly a blast. I definitely recommend playing it if you haven't given it a try. Now we move on to the Bronze Age, which was around 3000 to 1200 BCE, with it again being different amongst other regions. Oh, and by the way, some of the time periods overlap with each other because 1, many time periods are categorized by a big change or event, and certain regions were slower/faster than others, and 2, they weren't clean breaks like sliced bread. Anyways, as you could guess by the name, the Bronze Age is where tools and weapons were being made out of bronze, replacing stone and copper. This made those tools and weapons much stronger. And because copper and tin were still needed to produce bronze, long-distance trade networks were being created to transport the materials. As well as that, we begin to see even more complex societies being created with cities and states, and even writing systems in some areas. This was one of the first big technological advancements in human history. For this game, I picked a city-building game called Old World. It was hard finding a game specifically set in the Bronze Age, but this one does for the most part. You start in the late Bronze Age and will eventually work your way up to the Iron Age and potentially the early Classical Age. It's a turn-based strategy game where you start as one of the leaders of a major nation, such as Egypt, Greece, Rome, etc. Each turn you are given orders, which can then be used to construct a load of different things, move units, recruit militias, make diplomatic decisions, etc. Basically, everything you do, you spend these orders. And oh my god, is there so much depth to this game. I probably spent like 2 days, about 6 hours worth, on just the tutorial because I wanted the true experience. You need to worry about building relationships with certain families, people, and nations, what technology you should research, an entire skill tree, religious efforts, and so much more. I felt like I was actually running a city with how much I needed to worry about. You eventually win when you achieve a certain amount of ambitions, which are pretty much achievements. Because this game starts off in the Bronze Age, every aspect is reflected by that. You're pretty much starting from scratch, building the world's first empire. A lot of the nations you play as, such as Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, were all actual nations becoming more prominent in the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age. The game does a great job showing you how these nations prioritized constructing the actual cities and creating a system of governance. You can actually use a nation's real-life strengths back then to help you in the game, like Babylon's high education or Egypt's river-based economy. How you interact with other nations is also very reflective. A lot of these nations starting out were constantly fighting for fertile land, desirable regions, and trade routes by using armies armed with spears, chariots, and bows, which you definitely see a lot of in this game. Okay, this type of game usually isn't my cup of tea, but I will admit, once I got through the hours of tutorials, I did start to have a bit of fun building my own empire, even if I didn't really know what I was doing half the time. You have complete and total control over the outcome of something you've probably spent hours investing into, which I love, but also hate because it's a bit stressful. If you love history, strategy games, and are able to digest loads of information at once, then this is the perfect game for you. As we move into around 1200 BCE, we reach the Iron Age. As you could probably guess at this point, the Iron Age is signified by the widespread use of iron to replace bronze in making tools and weapons. Pretty straightforward. And because these tools were now bigger and better than ever, agriculture effectiveness grew and populations and permanent settlements started growing fast. And because reliable weapons could be supplied on a more grander scale and not just to the elites, we can see the power dynamic within these nations starting to shift. As people in the 21st century, the introduction of a new metal doesn't sound that big, but back then, it changed how the entire world operated. Taking place between 1200 to 500 BCE, the exact time span of the Iron Age, I decided to play Apotheon, a very unique 2D side-scrolling platformer. The game takes place in a mythic version of ancient Greece, where Olympian gods were widely believed in. Zeus, the leader of these gods, abandons all of humanity, taking away their gifts and setting the human world into chaos. You, a character named Nicandrios, is a warrior who is chosen by Hera and given powers to ascend Mount Olympus to steal each god's power and save humanity. An amazing premise to a game, I must say. Kinda reminds me of God of War. You do this by using a wide variety of different weapons, which were really fun experimenting with, to defeat mythical monsters and enemies, explore what felt very much like an open world, complete side quests, and solve puzzles that actually were kind of challenging. With a lot of these games, it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly when it takes place, because they're fictional stories that take elements from different periods. For example, the gods on Mount Olympus suggest a time period that predates the Greece Bronze Age, the art style reflects classical Greece, and the weapons say the Iron Age. But because this game has so many elements from the Iron Age, I decided to use this game to show off the period. The warrior culture we see in this game through the constant fighting are a lot like the militarized city-states that rose in the early Greece Iron Age, called police. The actual setting of the game is a clear indicator of early urban life in the Iron Age, with how the markets, towns, and temples are constructed to mirror real-life areas in Greece. Even the art style this game uses imitates the black figure pottery that was used in archaic Greek art from 700 to 500 CE. And if we really wanted to dive deep into ideas and cultural changes, the plot of the game, rebelling against the gods and reclaiming the human world, reflects how people during this time period began relying less on divine intervention from mythical gods and focused more on human progress through government and other organizations. Now that we got that out of the way, this game kinda blew my mind. I mean, I've played my fair share of 2D platformers, but most of them were Nintendo games. My mind lacked the imagination of what was possible with these types of games, until I played this. The combat system alone was enough to keep me entertained for hours. It's surprisingly detailed, but yet still easy to learn, which made defeating enemies so satisfying. And there are plenty of different enemies with different attacks you need to learn, so it never gets stale. But there's so much more than just running around fighting enemies. There's weapon rarities, a crafting system, side missions that feel like the main story, upgrades to your character, and much more. I also really love the intensity of the boss fights too. I could probably make an entire video on just this game. Now we start getting into more complicated time periods. Like I mentioned before, certain regions experience time periods differently. Because writing systems were the norm now, historians could use actual written documents to pinpoint each region's specific time period instead of just grouping the whole world into one big time period. And now that very large nations exist all over the world, experiencing different changes, a lot of these nations have their own labeled time period, which often overlap with each other. It definitely put my head through the ringer while researching this video. But I mean, it makes sense. Without a fast transportation system, internet, or cell phones, if one nation made a technological breakthrough, there wasn't really a quick way to convey that information to others. And even if they could, I don't think they would have because each nation wanted to be the most powerful and sometimes they were even at war with each other. With that being said, I tried progressing through time by picking the bigger time periods, nations that had the most influential changes. So the next time period on our list is the Classical Era, specifically Classical Greece. From 480 to 323 BC, this time period was filled with many different achievements, shaping Western civilizations to come. Here we see those city-states we talked about earlier become even more powerful, with Athens and Sparta being the most influential. Speaking of Athens, they became the world's first direct democracy, which allowed citizens to vote on laws. To arise from this period are intellectual scholars that many of us have even heard of today, like philosophers such as Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. Other big players like the father of history, Herodotus, the father of medicine, Hippocrates, and many other names emerged during this era. But like almost every era, war was also there. Athens and Sparta were at war for a long period of time, which seriously hurt the Greek world as a whole. Now I had to get at least one Assassin's Creed game in this video. I could probably play only Assassin's Creed games for this video, but that would be kinda boring. But, for this one time, I decided to play Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which takes place right around 431 BC. These games are known for being based off of real history. A lot of those big names I just mentioned are actually in the game, which was really cool to see. You choose to play as two characters, Alexios or Cassandra. After their tragic disappearance as kids, they work to uncover their very mysterious past and family history through a buttload of quests. But that is only one objective. You'll also choose to help Sparta or Athens in the ongoing war, discover and destroy an evil secret cult, explore tons of vast lands, and complete countless side missions. Doing these things will help the assassins in the present, who are controlling your player in the past, to find the Staff of Hermes and locate Atlantis. Never really playing any Assassin's Creed games before, this part was a little confusing, so I tend to gloss over it. But being an Assassin's Creed game, many things you see here are a real reflection of what the period was like. Set during the Peloponnesian War, that conflict between Athens and Sparta is at its peak, which is why it's such a huge part of this game. Most enemies that you fight are either Athenian or Spartan, but not all. You can even participate in large-scale battles between the two empires. Naturally, a lot of real-life historical locations you can actually visit, and a lot of the structures reflect real classical era architecture. It was honestly pretty neat seeing a lot of the statues we might see today painted with a lot of detail instead of the extremely old plain white. But the biggest reflection are the key figures like Herodotus, Socrates, and Leonidas. They're often big parts of the story. You get to talk with them, learn from them, and even get missions from them. Yeah, this is probably not how they were back then, but it's still cool to see how they might have been. Okay, I have a confession. I may have sunk 120 hours into this game. So do I think it's fun? Yeah. I never really got into the Assassin's Creed games before because I was so overstimulated with how much there was to do, with me being a completionist and all. But after forcing myself to play the game, I understand how it works now, and I'm addicted. It's a grind game. The story's alright, not the greatest, but exploring this huge map, doing all the location objectives and side missions is a fun grind. And the combat has yet to get boring, which is good because there's a lot of it, on top of sailing around on your ship, singing songs, and sinking your foes. This truly is a gorgeous game. And it's one of those games where I prefer it not to be super realistic. Like, I don't want my horse to have Red Dead 2 mechanics. I want to zoom through the lands, jumping off 2-story cliffs and survive, so I can get to my destination quicker. And even though the story isn't Life is Strange level, you do grow to love the characters. Like Socrates, who just never gives you a straight answer, which you would expect. Because of this game, I will definitely be going back and playing the other Assassin's Creed games. Moving forward, we have the Maurya Empire period, taking place from 322 to 185 BC. One of the key leaders of this empire was Ashoka the Great, who, after witnessing the death and destruction of the Kalinga War, converted to Buddhism, promoting nonviolence and a compassionate government. It was a prosperous economy, being a large international trade hub. But after the death of Ashoka, the empire started to decline due to them not knowing who should succeed him and other regions breaking away. It was very difficult finding a game that took place during this time and had elements from the Maurya Empire, but I happened to find a PlayStation 2 game made in 2009 called Chandragupta Warrior Prince. Yeah, I know, you've probably never heard of this game before, so let me fill you in. Taking place in 323 BC, this action-adventure 2D fighting game takes you to the very beginning of the Maurya Empire. You play as Chandragupta Maurya, and as you could probably tell by his name, he is the founder of the Maurya Empire. It pretty much takes you through the life of this ancient Indian leader and how he came to overthrow the Nanda dynasty and take his rightful place as leader. If you want an in-depth look about this time period while perhaps playing a game, then this is it. I mean, this game doesn't just use elements in the game to reflect the time period. This game is the time period. A lot of the diplomatic and political issues, as well as battles that took place during this time, are actually included in the game. And everything from the music, clothing, weapons, and dialogue are all very accurate too. It's a great history lesson, but a terrible game. I'm sorry, I really wanted to enjoy it, but man, it is rough. Firstly, the mechanics are so janky. Everything is slow and delayed and not precise at all. Fighting enemies was such a pain in the butt, which was like 90% of the game. And oh my god, the stupid swinging mechanics. Why do I get rigor mortis in the middle of my swing? I do kind of like having to use your bow or rock to shoot enemies in the background or foreground, but the charm died quickly. The bosses are super basic, the puzzles are just annoying, not fun, and the level designs are bland and sometimes super confusing. The game was aimed for the Indian market, and a game not marketed to the whole world, especially in 2009, was doomed from the start. The era of the Roman Empire. You'd have to be snoozing in the back of history class to have never heard of this powerhouse of an empire. Starting in 27 BC, when Augustus became the first emperor, this humongous empire stretched across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, making it one of the largest political entities of the entire world at the time. You may think of the Roman Empire in a constant state of war based on movies and other forms of media, but for about 200 years, it experienced nothing but peace called the Pax Romana. Yes, it was a spectacular empire at the time, but even more so was how it influenced civilizations years and years later. They built over 50,000 miles of road, bridges, and other infrastructures that will last incredibly long. Their creativity and innovations in architecture will be used by much of Europe. Many of its political ideas and beliefs were adopted or at least looked at by future civilizations, and even Latin evolved into Roman languages that many of us recognize today, like Spanish, French, and Italian. This empire was a great foundation for the future, but all things must come to an end. In 476 CE, it falls after the empire was split into two and the current emperor was forcefully removed. With so many games to choose from, I wanted to pick one that placed us right in the center of the action. So I chose Rise, Son of Rome. I remember seeing this way back when Microsoft announced the Xbox One, but I never got around to playing it until now. Taking place around 60 to 61 CE, you play as a Roman soldier / centurion. After his family is killed by barbarians, he starts his quest of vengeance by rising through the ranks of the Roman army and taking part in a bunch of hack and slash battles, commanding his army to help slay his foes. Once he returns home to Rome after defeating his enemies, he is then met with corruption and seeks even more revenge. A lot of the military tactics and formations you see within the game were heavily inspired by the real thing. Swords, javelins, and spears were all strategically placed to have the best chance of victory. And because the developer of the game, Crytek, sent people out to study classical architecture in Rome, naturally, those elements are pretty accurate. A couple characters like Nero, a Roman emperor, and Boudica, a warrior queen, were real players in the era, with Boudica being a large antagonist. Except Nero didn't actually have any children. And these barbarian invasions were real issues Romans had to constantly deal with on their borders. As far as games go, this one's kinda mid. Not terrible, but it gets kinda boring. The combat system works and is pretty cool for the first 20 minutes, but it gets pretty old, and there is so much fighting the same enemies over and over. Like, there's only so much of the same execution I could see before I decide to never do it again. There are some neat gimmicks like taking control of this giant ballista or pushing your army to attack with javelins, but that's all they really are, gimmicks. There's a good amount of things you can do with formations and stuff, but I didn't really bother with this unless I had to. It felt like one of those things developers threw in there to make you think you're making a difference, but you really aren't, at least to me. And that's pretty much it. It's all fighting, nothing else. Again, not terrible, but not worth playing more than 30 minutes at a time. Next is another time period specific to a region, China, 206 BC to 220 CE, called the Han Dynasty. Founded by Emperor Gaozu, the Han Dynasty was the second great imperial dynasty of China. The period can be split into two phases, the Western, former Han, and the Eastern, later Han. This dynasty as a whole did so much for future China. It adopted a bureaucratic system of government where leaders were selected off of merit instead of inherited, which many of us today agree with. It helped gain China so much more territory and helped open the Silk Road, a trade route between China and Central Asia. This era was also a major technological golden age. Paper, water clocks, and better calendars were invented, Confucianism was created which valued social harmony, and iron tools and steel production grew significantly. Along with that, the era left a rich legacy in art as well. The population and economy flourished, and Buddhism was introduced due to people communicating on the Silk Road. A beautiful sounding period of history, which eventually fell due to rebellions, warlordism, and internal conflicts. The game I went with to depict this era was Wolong Fallen Dynasty. It's a Souls-like game that takes place in 184 AD, during the decline of the Han Dynasty, as you could have probably guessed by the name. You play as a militia soldier who is granted supernatural-like abilities once you are slain defending your village. With these abilities and your sick fighting moves, you must work to stop the Yellow Turban Rebellion and their leader from taking control of the country and bringing down the Han Dynasty. You'll encounter many different enemies and incredibly difficult bosses, all of which can be defeated by melee and ranged weapons, consuming spirit to use your very wide range of abilities, and even divine beasts. I mean, there are so many different ways to fight, it was almost too much to process at once. The time period this takes place in makes sense. The Han Dynasty is on the verge of collapse. People are rebelling, causing chaos, and heroes like our character in the game are trying to save the country. Our main enemy in the game, the Yellow Turban Rebellion, was an actual rebellion that seriously weakened the dynasty, which I personally feel is cooler than a made-up villain. Even the bosses were real historical figures like Cao Cao and Liu Bei. Granted, they weren't actually supernatural beings, but these beings are based on mythical creatures and monsters believed during that time. So yeah, even the fictionalized stuff is based on the period. And honestly, the more you learn about the rebellion, the more you side with them in the game and in real life. The people were suffering due to political corruption, heavy taxation, and natural disasters, so the people thought enough was enough. And it's nice to see this conflict included within the game through things like eunuch ministers misusing their power. Now I love games like this. You run through defeating enemies, upgrading your skills and gear, and the challenge makes it very rewarding. But it being my very first Souls-like game, it's safe to say I struggled. I had a ton of fun, but man did I die a lot. They do not mess around. I beat a couple of bosses, which I will add are super unique and cool, but one boss just beat my ass into submission. Pause. You have to time every single move perfectly, down to the millisecond. The combat was super smooth and fun, it's just user error. I really enjoyed the characters, animations, and especially the exploration and side quests. In many games, these things are optional, but I felt like I had to search for secrets in order to get better gear for the boss fights, which was super fun. And the fact that the story is mostly based off true events is the cherry on top. An overall very good, but hard game. From 320 to 550, we have the Gupta Empire era, an often underlooked part of history but still important. This empire ruled over large parts of northern and central India. Each culture or nation I've noticed have their own golden age, with this being India's. They made mathematical breakthroughs with the concept of zero and the decimal place system, along with other areas of math. It was first proposed during this empire that the Earth rotated on its axis, literary masterpieces were created that are still being read today, long-lasting art forms were developed, and doctors were performing surgeries as well as writing medical manuals that many can read in the future to help treat and cure diseases. Like other flourishing empires we already discussed, the Gupta Empire enjoyed political stability through divided power and appointed officials, successfully traded with other nations, and religions such as Hinduism and Buddhism grew bigger than ever. The empire eventually fell in the beginning of the 5th century when Hunnic invasions began and weak leaders caused it to collapse. Now, because the Gupta Empire period isn't as interesting as, let's say, the Roman Empire, it often flies under the radar. Therefore, there are little games that depict it, except history world-building games, which I don't want this whole video to be about. So I decided to do something different for this era. Play a game that originated during this time. You might have heard of it, chess. Originating in the later Gupta period and the empire being credited the creation of chess, it was originally called Chaturanga. Now, there are theories about how this game was played, but no one knows for sure. But with it being the inspiration, we can guess that it's pretty similar to the chess we play today, but with a couple differences. From India, the game spread to Persia, being called Shatranj, then into Europe and the Muslim world, evolving into what we know today. Just in case you weren't aware of how chess works, like me before this video, each player has 16 pieces who can only move in specific ways. The goal is to move those pieces in a way that leaves your opponent's king with no way to escape, checkmating them. It's a lot more complicated than that, but you get the gist. Now, I may be reaching, but I'm still gonna mention how the game reflects the time period in the Gupta Empire. First off, the original pieces, infantry, cavalry, elephants, and chariots, referred to actual divisions in the ancient Indian army. Because of this, it suggested that the game was more than just a game, it mirrored real strategic thinking tied to warfare. The planning, foresight, and tactical thinking needed to play this game may be a reflection of how Gupta commanders may have strategized battles. Secondly, with the empire being known for sophisticated thinking and innovations in knowledge, it makes sense that they developed a game that was equally as thought-provoking. Now, chess never really interested me, mainly because I didn't really understand it. And after 2 hours of tutorials on chess.com, I still don't know what I'm doing half the time, but I have a much better understanding. I know how the pieces move, and I know what the objective is. There's just so many different things to think about during a game of chess, so many strategies. But I did have fun though, against bots of course. But even then, I still couldn't beat the AI on easy. But the complexities of this game really makes me appreciate the long history of how this game began. And I'm determined to get good at it. So in 10 years, maybe I'll be able to beat stupid Martin. Next is a fan favorite time period, the Viking Age, taking place from 793 to 1066. It started with an infamous raid on the monastery of Lindsfarne by Norse Vikings in 793. This raid left all of Europe stunned and scared. Vikings originated in Scandinavia and were very skilled in ocean exploration and combat. And with these skills, they launched many hit-and-run raids on towns, monasteries, islands, all with the help of their quick, strong longships. And like any other colonizer, they created permanent settlements in places like Normandy, Dublin, and York, England. But they weren't always bloodthirsty. Because of their knowledge of the sea, they created extensive trade networks, trading many different goods. They even had a complex legal system in place, which I'm not even going to try to explain because I barely understand it. The Vikings in general helped shape medieval Europe and the political climate. And Vikings are very cool, but compared to other time periods we discussed, it's really not that significant. The game I went with was Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, one of the only games on this list I've played before, and man, was it a trip. You play as a warrior named Senua who suffers from psychosis. After her lover was killed by a group called the Northmen, she sets out on a journey to Helheim, the realm of the dead, to rescue his soul, carrying his head as a vessel for that soul. Along her journey, she'll fight monsters and gods, which symbolize her inner demons and psychological trauma. It is a possibility that some of these monsters are just Northmen that Senua sees differently. The game is super deep, and the devs did a great job having the player wonder what is real and what is not. And the inner voices you're constantly hearing gives you just a glimpse of what living with psychosis feels like.
She can get up now. What's happening? She can get up now. She can get up. Must be magic. Dark magic. A trick.
The game takes a lot of inspiration from Celtic culture. Where Senua is from is historically known for being raided by Vikings, and the Viking raid that left her village destroyed has a big impact on the story. The monsters she faces, Helheim and the different realms, are all based on Norse mythology. You can even find little collectibles that tell stories of Norse legends. The most interesting piece for me, though, is how mental illnesses or conditions are depicted. During this period, these things were not well understood, and were often tied to religious meanings. Senua's mother suffered from the same illness and tried to convince her it was a gift, allowing her to see visions, while her father saw it as a curse sent from the gods destined to doom them all. It added even more trauma to her life and showed how little people knew about mental illnesses back then. It's just super fascinating that this game on the surface looks like a fantasy game that takes place in a world that would have never existed, but as you dive deeper, realize that it could be a realistic game because they're just hallucinations caused by psychosis. And it helps that the actual gameplay is fun too. The super cinematic fight scenes and beautiful environment really immerse you into the game, especially the boss fights. Every fight felt like a movie, and the combat is just detailed enough to be fun, but not too crazy where it feels like Dark Souls or something. It's a storytelling game that is done really well, and a bit of horror. And all you nerds don't need to worry, there are plenty of challenging puzzles to solve as well. If you want to play a game that makes your head explode, this is it. The Song Dynasty was a time period where China ruled from 960 to 1279. Again, this period can be split into two phases. The earlier Northern Song, where Song ruled most of China, and the later Southern Song, where Song had to retreat after losing to Northern powers. This empire and period of China is known as Commercial Revolution, and for good reason. They created the world's first government-backed paper currency, which got the ball rolling for other nations to come. They made huge agricultural advances like improved irrigation and faster maturing rice. The trade game was booming both domestically and internationally, and the population was skyrocketing, with some cities reaching 1 million people, which was kind of unheard of. But that's not all. They also made a lot of intellectual and technological advancements like the development of movable type printing, which helped spread books and education, and refined iron, and started using coal as fuel. Wait, there's more. Their amazing and beautiful art set the precedent for later Chinese art, and something about a civil service examination system that allowed normal people to hold government positions based on their ability rather than birth. Not as interesting, I know, but it influenced the Chinese political world for centuries. Unfortunately, their weak army folded to external pressures and a final invasion by the Mongols. Yeah, those guys. Now, there were only like 4 games I could have played that were actually in the Song Dynasty, and they're so old, I don't even know how to play them. So the game I decided to go with may be a little controversial because it takes inspiration from a number of different time periods. That game is For Honor. Taking inspiration from a variety of different warrior cultures, this fantasy medieval world has different factions duking it out through its unique combat system. Within these factions, there are different types of warriors you can play as, like bruisers, assassins, and so on. I was hesitant to play this game because of the sweats that would dominate me, but I was pleasantly surprised to see it had a campaign to play. In this campaign, there is a warmonger named Parlin who manipulates the factions to be at constant war with each other so he can profit off of it. Yeah, that sounds like a supervillain. You go through each faction playing their own sort of mini-campaign. And yeah, it's a very combat mechanic heavy game. Okay, so here's the part where I really start grasping at straws. For Honor released an expansion called Marching Fire that introduced a new faction called the Wu Lin. It's described as a group of warriors originating from ancient China who use martial arts tactics that may have been used during the Song Dynasty. And that's pretty much all the inspiration For Honor draws from the Song Dynasty. Look, not every game can be a perfect representation, especially with time periods that aren't well covered. So, instead, I'll talk about why this game isn't a great representation of the Song Dynasty. So we'll still do some learning, just a little differently compared to what we have been doing. First off is the environment. The ancient China setting doesn't reference to the Song Dynasty at all. No talk about emperors, historical politics, or advancements like paper money. The setting is kind of vague in the game. Secondly, China didn't have a single unified warrior class like Europe's knights or Japan's samurais, and definitely not like the game's Wu Lin faction. Instead, they had armies that were state organized, populated by conscripts, career soldiers, and regional militias. And as you could probably guess, they didn't have any lone warrior types either. The actual Song Dynasty military used weapons such as spears, bows or crossbows, shields, early gunpowder weapons, and straight swords. The weapons seen in the game used by the Wu Lin faction, like the Guandao, hook sword, and Shaolin-style dual weapons, came much later than the Song Dynasty. The Shaolin-style weapons specifically, and many of the martial arts moves used in the game, were more for self-defense or taught in martial arts schools, not used in combat during war. So with all this, think of the Wu Lin as Hollywood China, not historical China. With that out of the way, I did have a lot of fun with the game. Obviously, that would have been a different story if I played online multiplayer, but I didn't. The developers really nailed the intensity of battling, which is emphasized by good AI that actually know how to use the game's mechanics. And the game has a surprising amount of strategy needed, like determining which enemy to focus on or trying to predict which direction you should block. Honestly, the strategy aspect is probably why I enjoyed it so much. You can't just run around swinging your sword, you actually have to think during combat. I didn't get much into the story, and from what I saw I couldn't really follow, but these factions are so freaking cool, I just love being there. So the next time period I decided to go with doesn't have some fancy name like the others in this video, but I had to include it because of how iconic and popular it is, especially with all us nerds. That period is the late 13th century, early 14th century. What was happening during this time, you ask? The Crusades and Knights Templar. More specifically, the end of the Crusades and Knights Templar. In 1095, Pope Urban II called for a series of military religious expeditions to recapture the Holy Land like Jerusalem and other sacred sites from Muslim rule, and return them to Western Christians. These crusades took place all over, with the first one being very successful at retaking Jerusalem. Now we introduce one of the coolest groups in history, the Knights Templar. Around 1118, a small group of French knights started a religious military order called the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, with its goal of protecting pilgrims traveling to holy sites. Yeah, not nearly as cool of a name. In 1129, the group went from a ragtag group to being recognized and endorsed by the Church of the Council of Troyes. The Templars started to increase dramatically, with its members taking vows similar to monks and engaging in warfare. They built castles, armed fortresses, garrisoned towns, but most importantly, they were the military backbone of the Crusader state defense, even fighting in major Crusader campaigns. They even became so large and powerful, they had their own banking and finance network in Europe. But as Muslim powers grew, the Crusader states weakened with the loss of key battles, with the final nail in the coffin being the fall of Acre in 1291. And with the Knights Templar having political and financial issues, they were disbanded. Let me introduce you to the game, The First Templar. The game takes place from 1291 and continues into 1307, the exact time period the Crusades were ending and the Knights Templar were being persecuted, which is probably the most chaotic time for a game to take place. You play as two Templar knights who are set out to uncover a large conspiracy involving the Templar Order, the Church, and the Inquisition. But their ultimate goal is to search for the Holy Grail. It's a linear story game that focuses pretty heavy on the combat, but there still are plenty of side missions and collectibles to uncover. And don't worry, there are lots of different enemy types which include mythical creatures and big bosses, so make sure you perfect those combos, special moves, blocks, and rolls. Now you could probably tell that this game takes heavy inspiration from actual events. I mean, the start of the game takes place during the fall of Acre, and there are constant references to things like the Templar, the Holy Lands, and conflicts between Muslims and Christians. And as you can imagine, once the Crusades ended and the Knights Templar were being persecuted, those knights faced betrayal, persecution, and pressure from leaders, just like our main characters in the game. The combat is also pretty accurate to how knights would have fought, with a trusty sword and shield, and big historical locations are included in the game as well. Even though this game got pretty mixed reviews, which I usually avoid but couldn't this time because my research took me there, I had a lot of fun with it. I know, big surprise. It just has that old school feel to it with its straightforward, fun story, even though the game came out in 2011. Yes, the same year as Batman Arkham City. But as we can see from games like Lethal Company or even Among Us, how a game looks does not reflect how fun it will be. And the game's story really helps that because, come on, you play as knights searching for the Holy Grail. How can this not be fun? The combat is surprisingly super slick and satisfying, and both characters have very different kits with different combos and abilities, so you can find out which one is more fun for you. What I think I love most about this game is that it's linear. I feel like almost every game that's medieval or is inspired by this time period is open world. Don't get me wrong, I love open world games, but it was a nice fresh breath of air to just play this type of game and not focus on where I'm going next. But like I said, there's still plenty of exploration to do. Ooh, we're making our way up. In a span of around 300 years, we have the European Renaissance period, lasting from 1300 to 1600. It's kind of crazy to think that you could live for 150 years, hell 200, and still be in the same time period. Going through each era like this just makes everything seem much closer together. Anyways, this era marked the transition from the medieval world to the modern Europe world. It began with an emphasis on better education, focusing more on knowledge that can expand the mind, rather than just teaching basic things like history, grammar, and so on. The art that came from this period is a huge staple. It was beginning to portray the world and people more realistically. This is where we saw artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael shine. No, not the Ninja Turtles. We also saw plenty of advancements in areas such as math, astronomy, anatomy, engineering, physics, like Da Vinci's famous drawing of the human body, or Gutenberg's printing press. And with all this art and advancements, cities and populations started booming in wealth. This whole era altered entire European thought and culture. Giving it this small section doesn't do it justice. The game I went with was actually one I wanted to play myself, Kingdom Come Deliverance. This open-world RPG is one of the games on this list that actually prioritizes a historical realistic experience rather than a fantasy. It takes place in 1403, and Sigismund of Hungary, the current king's half-brother, launches a series of raids on the country of Bohemia. When one of those raids destroys the town of our main character and kills his family, he is left homeless and wants justice. So he joins the resistance army where he finds himself in civil war, having to make political and moral decisions, and always fighting someone. Unlike other games where you put a certain amount of points into your character to get a specific build, you craft Henry through the actions and decisions you make, which is a cool difference. There's different forms of combat like sword fighting, archery, and horseback. And it being an RPG, you have to maintain things such as rest, hunger, reputation, and so on. The characters and plot are based on true events. Wenceslaus IV and his brother Sigismund were actually having a power struggle over the throne during this time. The developers of this game really strived for accuracy, putting a ton of research and detail into things like architecture, village layout, clothing, armor, and interior design. Even the NPCs act according to their social status, with each one showing different behaviors. And like I mentioned before, there are no monsters or other fantasy creatures within the game. And I mean, almost everything you see in the game is inspired by the real thing, and even helps you learn about history of this time, like coin minting, village life, and forging. When developers go above and beyond to consult with historians, archaeologists, and medieval experts, this is the game you expect to see. Talking about the game itself, I wish I had bought and played the game on my computer rather than my Xbox because it didn't run as smooth as I was expecting. I know, rookie mistake. But once I looked past this, I did have fun and actually got really immersed with all the lore and characters. I mean, in most games, if there was a 10-minute plus dialogue, I would skip it so freaking quick. But I was actually really interested to see what everyone had to say. But because of this, and the sheer amount of, well, everything in this game, I didn't even scratch the surface. There is so much to do. This game is an investment. Not a bad thing, just giving you a warning. But from what I played, the combat is good. Not the greatest, but in a game like this, combat isn't the biggest concern. But it is realistic, so maybe I'm just spoiled with the exaggerated combat systems in other games. But like I said, I didn't make it very far at all, so I can't give much of a definite conclusion, but from what I can tell, it's a good game. But oh my god, whoever created this lockpicking system needs to drown in a jar of mayonnaise. Japan's Edo period, lasting from 1603 to 1868, is an era that heavily impacted their culture and how they operated as a country. In 1603, a man named Tokugawa Ieyasu created the shogunate, a military government run by a leader called a shogun, with Tokugawa being the first. This government created very strict policies and a hierarchy that everyone had to follow. Samurais were at the top class and merchants were at the bottom. And if you were a feudal lord, someone who owned large pieces of land and ran warrior bands, you were forced to live in Edo, modern-day Tokyo, for a few years, then spend a few years on your own land. Their families were forced to stay in Edo the entire time, pretty much being held hostage to keep these feudal lords from going to war with each other. I mean, I guess that's one way to do it. Their plan did work. Before the Edo period, Japan spent centuries in civil war, but with this new government, they had a long period of peace, which allowed them to focus on building their culture and economy. During this time, Japan pretty much also closed off its entire country to the outside world, meaning very limited trade. With a rapidly growing population, agricultural efforts and advancements were skyrocketing, a market economy emerged, and road networks were highly improved. In terms of art and literature, the culture exploded, so much so that the period is known as a cultural flowering. Novels and stories were written to be told to the public, forms of theater like puppets were becoming insanely popular, art pieces took on a unique form that are still iconic today, and entertainment districts started to emerge. But because Japan was thriving, the rest of the world was upset that they were not open for trade and treaties. So with this pressure and the inequalities many of the citizens were starting to face, this period eventually ended. The game I played for this period is one of the most unique looking games I've personally ever played, Trek to Yomi. The game is set in Japan that is at war, with the main character being a samurai named Hiroki. When his village is attacked and his master is killed, he vows to protect the village and his loved ones. A little bit into the story, Hiroki dies and is sent to Yomi, Japan's mythological underworld, to battle his demons and make peace. Using a katana and a number of ranged weapons, you're forced to fight a variety of different enemies in this side-scrolling game. But even though it's side-scrolling and the story is linear, there is still plenty of exploration. Now, the Edo period is mainly recognized by its strict government, which this game doesn't really mention or reference to, but there are still plenty of elements that reflect the time period. For one, samurais had a big role in villages like our protagonist comes from. They acted as military administrators for those feudal lords, and were often village protectors and police officials, much like Hiroki. Even how samurais look is more accurate than many games. Samurais didn't typically wear that full battlefield armor we're used to besides during ceremonies. The look and layout of the game's environment are also pretty accurate. Wooden or tiled homes, a shrine or temple in the center of town, small defensive outposts, and dense forests. As you could guess, the weapons used in this game were pretty standard during the Edo period, and the one-on-one duels and defensive tactics were common techniques. Shinto, a religion that worships spirits, was very strong during this period, which the game heavily inspires from through things like spirits, shrines, and yomi. I know you guys are probably expecting me to glaze this game like I've done with most of the games on this list, and you're absolutely right. I was honestly in awe booting this game up. I mean, there's so many things I love about it, like the fixed camera position with each scene, It makes everything so much more cinematic. It's the reason why I fell in love with the original Resident Evil games. Capcom, please go back and make another. And don't even get me started on the art style. The black and white, slightly grainy look really captures the classic samurai cinematic look, which really immerses you. And the game is completely in Japanese, with English subtitles of course, which just perfectly adds to it. The combat is simple with a few combos and blocks, but man, does it feel and sound so damn amazing. Especially when you have sick shots like this. And the fact that you can still explore plenty in this world is the cherry on top. You have to play this game. From 1760 to 1840, we have the Industrial Revolution. To put simply, this period was when many societies and countries, with Britain being first, switched from the primarily agrarian farm-based economy to the industrial mass-producing one. New tech like machines and factories were being invented to help do this, as well as discovering new sources of energy like coal and steam. And because coal and steam engines allowed for factories to move pretty much anywhere, instead of being forced to be near water, this is where we see large industrial cities taking place, which many people moved to for the new employment opportunities. And because of this, products that perhaps were only available to high-class citizens were now affordable for the modern society. Better roads, canals, and eventually railroads made transporting these products 10 times easier and quicker. It all sounds amazing, but there were cons to this era, however. Due to rapid and unprepared growth of the industrial world, overcrowded cities, poor working conditions, child labor, pollution, and public health problems became apparent. The game I played that takes place during this period was Total War Napoleon. It's a turn-based war strategy game that covers the wars of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. You play as the powerful France and its leader Napoleon in a campaign to dominate Europe by commanding armies, conquering territories, and managing diplomacy. In the map section, you do pretty much everything a leader does. Create treaties, govern cities, construct buildings and institutions, and so much more. But then there's the battle element, which is like a completely different game. When a battle starts, you have to strategically command your army's cavalry, infantry, cannons, and leaders into perfect positions to defeat your enemy. It's really unique, especially because many of these battles actually happened. Within this game, you can see the effects of industrialization. Firearms, gunpowder munitions, and improved supplies were able to be mass-produced, which made large-scale battles like the ones we see in this game possible. Many of the cities or states you have to maintain are big industrial ones. And when there's change as big as the Industrial Revolution, there's bound to be some kickback by the people, which is where you have to use your militia and change some policies to calm them down. During this era as well, we see countries forming alliances, creating relationships, and going to war with each other, just like our game. But let's not pretend that's something special. We can pretty much say that about any time period. Now about the game. I don't think it was meant for people like me. Stupid with slightly short attention spans, that is. There were once again a ton of tutorials to play, and I don't think I learned a single piece of information. I mean, I was confused 90% of the time I was playing. I also kind of found it funny that I was hit with one of the hardest video game intros of all time. And then just this. Not that that's bad or anything, I just didn't know what I was expecting. The actual battles, I have hope in learning. There are a lot of mechanics and strategies you need to use to win, but I'm sure that'll come naturally as you play, and it can be kind of fun. I especially like the naval battles because I feel like Jack Sparrow or something. But all this reading and thinking you need to do in the campaign is too much for my little pea brain to handle. I feel like people who grow up playing these types of games grow up to be like surgeons and successful politicians. Now for the next era, I decided to go with England's Victorian Era, mainly because I wanted to add a game I saw to add to this video's unique roster. It still fits within our chronological timeline, and it's a pretty notable era. This period takes place from 1837 to 1901. In other words, when Queen Victoria ruled over Britain. This country faced huge changes. Here we saw the absolute peak of the Industrial Revolution, with Britain becoming the world's leading industrial and imperial power. We also see famous literature writers emerge like Charles Dickens, who wrote A Christmas Carol, and scientists like Charles Darwin, who created a theory about evolution. And no surprise to any other nation, they expanded even more, becoming the largest empire in world history during this time. The cons to this era are mainly due to the mass migration to Britain. Yes, they became too popular. Overcrowded housing, pollution, and high poverty rates became issues. Other issues like child labor, dangerous factory conditions, and sanitation issues rose to the boom of industrial factories. The game I went with is definitely a strange one. It's called Ravenous Devils. It follows two characters, a wife and a husband, who are a tailor and a butcher who run a Victorian-style workshop. Seems innocent enough. However, the secret to their success is human meat. Yeah, they kill certain customers, cut them into little pieces, and cook them into meals to serve to unsuspecting customers. Not reading what this game was about beforehand kinda left me horrified the first time. Being a management and crafting game, it's your job as the player to manage resources, craft what you think is best, and take care of tasks as timely as possible. These tasks include sewing clothes, butchering bodies, cooking meals, and serving clients, all while keeping your customers happy and hiding all the evidence. Definitely a little bit chaotic. The game reflects the Victorian era clearly by its style. The narrow streets, the brick buildings, dim lighting, combined with smoke and fog, and sense of being overcrowded. So much so that people don't seem to miss a bunch of people being turned into meat pies. The rooms are very dark and damp, everything's gaslit, and all the equipment they use match late 19th century machinery. The couples need to use real human meat in their dishes to keep their business alive is either intentionally or unintentionally a reflection of that hierarchy we mentioned. Many lower-class tradespeople like butchers, tailors, and family-run shops were struggling to survive. I doubt they resorted to cannibalism, but you get the gist. In fact, many reviewers of this game pointed out its very similar premise to a tale made in 1846 called The String of Pearls, where a barber husband kills his victims and throws their body through a trapdoor to his wife, where she then turns them into meat pies. I mean, the plot is pretty cool. I'm not surprised they used it to make a game. I had fun the first couple of days luring people in, slicing their necks and chopping them up, all while making fashionable outfits and delicious meals, but it just got too boring. Other games like this have big changes after a few days that require you to do something different or they implement a new mechanic. There's not really that here though. Besides getting slightly more busy each time or very little changes, I was doing the same thing at the same pace every time, which got old. Yeah, there were little story breaks now and then, and you could purchase upgrades and decorations, but I need something different gameplay-wise to keep my attention. Maybe I just didn't get there, but I did play for over an hour and a half, so I doubt it. The second to final era we'll be talking about is the World Wars period. World War I was kicked off with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, getting, well, the whole world entangled in a global conflict. In this war, we saw the use of trench warfare and new technologies come to light that would end countless lives, like tanks, poison gas, aircraft, and machine guns. Once Allies defeated Germany and its partners, the Treaty of Versailles was signed, officially putting an end to the war. But this treaty put harsh penalties on Germany, which led to resentment and extremism. So, between the two wars, we see the rise of a particular mustached German man and his party of not-so-friendly people, along with other notable regimes like Italy's Mussolini and militarist Japan. But before World War II was the Great Depression, which devastated global economies and left many people out of work. But in 1939, Germany invaded Poland, which triggered France and Britain to declare war. Here we see Germany using blitzkrieg tactics to very quickly attack their enemies with the element of surprise. In 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, which got America involved in the war. Rookie mistake. Turning points for the Allied powers were notable battles like the Battle of Britain, Stalingrad, and D-Day. But the final nail in the coffin were the two nukes dropped on Japan's cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Allies won, fascism was defeated, and the United Nations was created, but at the cost of 60 million lives. Now, with there being countless World War games, I wanted to pick one that was really good but people haven't seen a million times. So that landed me with Medal of Honor Airborne. Playing as Private First Class Boyd Travers, a US paratrooper, you go through a number of European operations, parachuting into battles with whatever starting position you choose, shooting enemies with iconic weapons, infiltrating enemy lines, and completing a bunch of different objectives. Is it a super deep game? Not really. Is it an accurate reflection of World War II? For the most part. Airborne operations and its paratroopers were a staple in World War II. Many nations used airborne troops to drop directly into battle, which this game perfectly captures. In this game, we obviously see the correct weapons and equipment that were used in real life, like the rifles, submachine guns, and grenades, as well as the uniforms. The different types of combat is also pretty consistent, like the mass infantry advances, small units tactics, cover-based firefights, and suppressive fire. The game taking place across different missions in different nations shows just how global World War II was, how many countries were involved. This constantly changing environment, mass armies, and constant chaos helps you get a sense of how important this war was to everyone involved. I wouldn't say this game is drastically different from other World War II games I've played, but it is unique enough to separate itself. I love the fact that you can just drop in wherever you like and not have to complete the objectives in any certain order. And when you die and redeploy, it feels like your old character died and you're playing as a new one, which added to the World War II feeling of so many people just fighting than dying. The controls and mechanics did take some getting used to. I mean, the game came out in 2007, and I wouldn't say the game is easy. In fact, I died a lot, but they were really satisfying once you did get used to them. And the game honestly still holds up. I love the fighting and dark looks some of these missions have. There's just something about a good classic World War II game that makes me feel so happy. Nothing crazy or complicated, just good old fun. And being able to upgrade your gun by using it was such a blast for me. Something to grind towards when mowing down the Axis forces. It may feel a little slower paced compared to games like Call of Duty, but I kinda like the more slower strategic approach to it. For our final time period we'll be talking about, we have the Cold War era, taking place between 1947 and 1991. Yes, this period came directly after World War II. The US and its allies had beef with the Soviet Union and its allies over Europe control and a difference of opinions on political systems. The US wanted to spread democracy while the Soviet Union wanted to spread communism. These disagreements led to very high tensions that would leave many fearing for their lives. Both superpowers created an arsenal of nuclear weapons that could destroy one another if one side decided to press the button. This concept is coined as mutually assured destruction. And with the invention of the Soviet atomic bomb, hydrogen bombs, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, we almost saw that. Besides nuclear threats, we also see both sides engaging in proxy wars, which was supporting the opposing side that superpower was going to war with. I know, a whole different level of petty. Speaking of petty, both sides wanted to be better than the other, so we saw things like the space race and other technological competitions. Luckily, the two sides never actually fought. The new Soviet Union leader Mikhail Gorbachev, I might have butchered that, implemented new reforms that promoted openness. Communist regimes in Europe fell, along with the Berlin Wall, and the USSR was officially dissolved in 1991. For this, I decided to go with an older game, like 2003 old. That is IGI 2. You play as an operative working for a covert military organization. You complete Cold War-style operations by completing tasks like retrieving intelligence, infiltrating and taking out enemies, sabotaging equipment, and reconning. This isn't your typical run-and-gun shooter. It's a game all about stealth, finesse. The more silent you are, the more likely you are to succeed. But with the missions being so open and there being multiple different routes you can take, you can decide on how you want to attack. You may have heard of agencies such as the CIA, MI6, or the KGB. Small, stealthy teams used to spy on the country's enemies during the Cold War. Well, this is what the game pretty much reflects, with a bit more, or I should say a lot more, violence. Who knows what these teams truly did during that time, but I imagine the espionage and sabotage looked similar. These teams would frequently infiltrate missile bases, research labs, and weapon development sites. They would also destroy enemy infrastructure, disable communications, destroy data, and sabotage weapon systems. All of these things we see within the game. And because a direct conflict with the USSR would lead to a nuclear war, doing these tasks was the only way to hurt each other because these teams had deniability, which really reinforces the Lone Ranger feel of the game. Apart from me sucking at the game because I've never really played a game on mouse and keyboard before, I enjoyed it. Some games say you need to be stealthy, but most of the time you can just run through guns blazing and be fine. But oh no, not this game. It gets almost impossible when you're spotted, so you really want to stay hidden. That may sound like a negative thing, but I actually love it because it forces me to play that style, because in other games there's not really a point. But games like this are why those iconic Call of Duty missions are so fun to play, because you really don't want to get spotted. There were some small issues I ran into on account of the game being so old, but overall a very fun game. The mechanics and movement are smooth, fun missions, and challenging AI. And that concludes our history lesson through video games. The next era is the present day, and we all know what that's about because we're living in it. History will always be a source of entertainment in media, books, games, anything, because we can relate to it on a deeper level. And it's easier to write a story based on something that already happened. But for our sakes, I hope there are no drastic wars or events that break out that influence future generations to make games about us. Who am I kidding? Of course it's gonna happen. It's kinda already happening right now. If you would like me to cover some games that accurately reflect current times, or even better, the future, and how realistic those games could be, let me know and I'll gladly do it. If you want a detailed bibliography on all the sources I used for this video, it'll be down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll catch you guys later. Deuces.